Welcome to the simulator, or more specifically, the Monte Carlo simulator. This thing allows you to work out the value of casino bonuses and refund offers, showing you things like how much you're going to make on average, but also what kind of risk that you're taking on, the bust rate, and what kind of bankroll you'll need for the offer. It also allows you to examine sports bonuses that come with wagering requirements, again showing you how much you're going to make on average, but also what kind of bankroll you'll need to hedge your bets. Feel free to watch or rewatch anything using the chapters below. Let's give it a spin. The easiest way to kind of show you how it works is to go through an example. So we've got this offer from BetRivers. Essentially, they will cover your losses in the first 24 hours, up to $500 on the casino. So you deposit $500, you place some bets, and if you lose your balance, they refund you within 72 hours. And what we recommend doing in the strategy is placing your full $500 on red or black. And you might be wondering why that is a good strategy. And that's kind of where the simulator can help us out. So we're going to plug in what the offer is. So it's a refund offer from BetRivers here. We're depositing $500. If we lose, then we get a $500 bonus, and you have to play through that $500 bonus once. Okay, so you have to play through this refund once if you lose. All right. If you win your $500 bet on roulette, then that's great. You're up $500, but if you lose, you have to play it through once on roulette. So we're going to say our initial wagering here is roulette, and we're covering 18 out of 37 numbers on the board. And we're doing a $500 spin here, okay? So we're essentially trying to hit $1,000 or bust right off the bat. And if we receive our $500 refund bonus, then we're going to play through on roulette. Again, covering 18 out of 37 numbers on the board, which is red. And we're going to do $1 spins just to keep the variance very low here, okay? So we can simulate that 100,000 times. And we can see that the average profit that we got from that offer was $236, okay? So this is really convenient here. You can actually see these are all the guys or all the simulations that ended up plus 500. So they won their initial $500 bet on red, on roulette. And all of these guys lost their first bet and then had to cash out the $500 refund, okay? Now, if you're playing through this $500 refund on roulette at $1 spins, you know, your variance is going to be quite low here, but you are going to lose around 3% of that $500 as you wager out here. So you're going to get some people who get pretty lucky, and then some people, you know, lose around 20 to 40. If you're very unlucky, you lose like 40 to 60 there. So let's kind of visualize what's going on here. So this is a kind of another way to look at this offer. All right, so we've got $500 on red, and if you hit red, then you win and you're up $500. If you don't hit red, then you lose and you're down $500, you get a $500 refund, and then you have to play through that $500 once on roulette, okay? And we know that roulette has a 1 in 37 house edge, right? So this 0 number is essentially the house edge. You're going to lose around 1 in 37 of your stakes as you grind through that $500 wagering requirement, right? So that is minus $13.51. And the probability of that whole outcome, the probability of going down this side of the tree, is 19 out of 37, because that is all the black numbers plus the green, okay? So you can kind of see how you've got an 18 out of 37 chance of winning, but the actual fair probability is 18 in 36. So that's how roulette works. They've got this house edge built in here, which is why you're more likely to lose than win here, okay? But with the refund, this offer is very much worth it, right? So we've got this thing called expected value, where you've got your total profit at the end, so you're making $500. The chance of hitting that is 18 out of 37. So your EV, or your expected value of that side, is 243. And then on this side of the tree, you're going to be down an expected amount of 1351. The probability of that happening is 19 out of 37, because that's the chance of hitting your blacks plus the green. And so the expected value of that side is minus 694. So that's simply your profit or loss, which is minus 1351, multiplied by your probability, which gives you this here. So the sum of the expected values gives you 236.30, which aligns with this here, okay? This is essentially brute forcing this whole thing. It's sending many simulations through this whole game. You know, we know the probabilities of win, we know probability of lose, so we can simulate this whole thing many times and simply take an average of all the profits, okay? So you can calculate this one analytically, but the easier way to do that for you guys is with this simulator. It's also worth noting that if you were to go your first bet on, say, 12 numbers of the roulette board, okay? So let's say that you're covering, you know, numbers 1 to 12 here, right? If you were to cover 12 numbers of the roulette board instead of 18, well, this is actually going to increase your expected value, right? So your stake is still going to be 500, but this time you're aiming for a target balance of 1500. You'll notice that the expected value is higher here. So let's run this simulation. So your expected value has gone from around 260 to around 313. And here you can see these are all the people who trebled their balance. So they put the $500 on 12 numbers on the roulette wheel and they got up to $1,000 profit. And then these are all the people that lost their first spin on roulette and had to cash out the refund. All right, so let's just visualize that updated strategy for a second. So now we're going $500 on a dozen, okay, so the first 12 numbers, for example, on the roulette wheel, and we've got a 12 out of 37 chance of hitting the dozen, and we've got a 25 out of 37 chance of not hitting the dozen. So there's 12 numbers that we've got our money on and 25 that we don't. If we do hit, then we're up $1,000, and if we lose, then just like before, we have to wager through that $500 refund at $1 spins on red or black. So we've got a 12 out of 37 chance of hitting, 25 out of 37 chance of not hitting, but you can see here that the sum of the expected value is actually higher than it was before. So previously it was 236, but this time we're getting our expected value up to 313. Now, of course, that comes with the caveat that you've got a much lower chance of hitting here. So this is a higher variance strategy. But that's just a very simple example of how to do that offer on the simulator. You can see exactly what you're getting into. You can see, you know, all these probability distributions of what's the chance of winning, what's the chance of not winning. You can see the expected value and all this other fun stuff like cash per hour and the average time taken based on the time placed these bets. If you want to really simplify it, you know, you can just actually do one simulation here. So this is essentially as if you were doing the offer. And let's go ahead. So, okay, that simulation happened to win. So they put the $500 on a dozen on roulette and trebled their balance, giving them $1,000 profit here. If we run it again, okay, that person lost, had to grind through the $500 at $1 spins on roulette and ended up minus 74. Okay, so if you're kind of very risk averse, you could set your stake even lower there. For example, let's just set that stake lower and let's run through. Let's just bump those simulations up to 100,000 again. That will reduce the variance of the losers here. Okay, so these guys aren't taking on as much risk because they've dramatically reduced their variance. Likewise, we've got another offer here from FanDuel. We've got this bonus back on losses up to $1,000 with an expected value of 470. We can easily put that in the simulator, $1,000 deposit, and we're getting a $1,000 bonus refund. You just have to play through the refund once. You can play it through on roulette or blackjack, whatever you like. Blackjack is higher value as it's higher return to player. There's only a 0.5% house edge in blackjack. So let's say that we're doing roulette with our initial $1,000 and we're just covering half the board here. We're not going too crazy. We're just looking for plus 1,000 or bust out. And we're looking for a target balance of 2,000. And we're going to play blackjack, just go $1 hands. Playing that through, let's go a million times to get a very accurate result here. There's a mistake there. You have to play through the full $1,000, of course. Let's try that again. So there you go. It's coming in about 470. That's why I've got this expected value at 470. And likewise with the BetRivers offer, if you were to increase your variance here, if you were to put your $1,000 on a dozen of the roulette table, then you've got 12 out of 37 covered, and you're of course aiming for a target balance now of $3,000. And let's say that you wanted to just play through your refund on roulette. You would go roulette, covering half of the board, and you're doing $1 spin, so that'll be 1,000 spins. And let's run that through the simulator. So you can see the expected value is much higher. We've got a $630 expected value, up from the 470, but of course you've got a roughly 2/3 chance of losing your $1,000 and having to cash out this bonus refund. Let's go through another example. So this is the BetVictor offer, and they've got a $200 casino bonus up to $1,200. So this is not a refund offer, it's a cashable offer, which is where things get a bit more interesting with the simulator. So essentially you deposit $600, you get a $1,200 bonus on the casino. So BetVictor are saying that you have to wager through $48,000 in order to withdraw your balance as cash. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is kind of show you the wrong way to do this. So let's say we've got a cashable offer, we've got a $600 deposit, we're going $1,200 bonus, and we have to wager $48,000 in order to withdraw. If you're to play that game, say, on a slot with just $1 spins, so that's a very low variance strategy here. Let's just see what happens if we start that simulation. You can see that your expected value is coming in as a negative number here. Okay, so I'm going to explain why that's happening with a quick tutorial on expected value. So over the years, casino bonuses have kind of worked like you would get, for example, so in this case, you've got a $1,200 bonus from BetVictor, and they're essentially saying that you have to wager $48,000 in order to withdraw. So from the casino's point of view, they always thought that, you know, if this player has to wager 48,000, well then their expected value is going to be $1,200, right, which the players are saving, minus $48,000 multiplied by the house edge of a slot. So you could probably find a 3% house edge slot on BetVictor, and that would give you, very simply, 1,200 minus 1440, which is minus $240. So traditionally BetVictor always thought in this example that they were going to make $240 here, right? But this formula is completely wrong. And the reason it's wrong is not all players are having to wager this full 48,000, okay? Some players will bust out very early. It's only the ones whose balances survived at the end of wagering who have to wager this entire 48,000. So this whole idea, this whole formula is completely wrong, okay? And for years, casinos they always had this wagering requirement as around 35 to 40, because then with a 3% house edge slot, the player was basically losing all of the value that they were receiving in the first place. That's what they thought. But that whole idea is wrong. And let me just explain an example of why it's wrong. So let's imagine a scenario where two people are both doing this BetVictor offer at the same time. So they both start with this $1,800 balance. And let's suppose they both throw this $1,800 balance on roulette, okay? One person puts it on red, one person puts it on black. We're just going to ignore the green for now just to keep this super simple. But you're going to have this situation where one person is going to win their first bet, one person is going to lose their first bet, okay? So this guy here is minus $600, okay? He deposited $600, he got a $1,200 bonus. He put his $1,800 on red and it lost. But this guy is currently up here on $3,600, okay? So he doubled his $1,800. Now he has to grind out this $48,000 wagering requirement, okay? Let's say he does it at super low stakes, so, you know, it might be something like this here as he grinds through this wagering. He's doing very low stakes here, so he's keeping the variance super low. So over the course of wagering, this guy, sure, he's going to lose 48,000 times 3% house edge, which is 1,440 on average, okay? He's going to, that's a kind of average figure. Sometimes he's going to lose more, sometimes he's going to lose less, of course. But on average, that guy's going to finish on 3,600 minus 1,440. So on average, this guy's going to finish on 2,160 balance, right? Which is his 3,600 minus the 1,440, right? So now we've got a situation where this guy made a profit of 1,560. This guy made a loss of $600, okay? So we can see the expected value is, remember, for the roulette thing, we're just assuming that there's no green. So we're assuming that this is essentially a coin flip that they've just done. So let's say 18 over 36 times 1560 and 18 over 36 times minus 600. So this portion is $780. This is minus $300. Okay, that's the portion of this side of the tree, if you like. So this strategy would give you $480 expected value. And the reason we were able to get this $480 expected value is because we've gone high variance at the start of wagering, right? So this guy was winning and this guy was losing in order to reduce the average wagering, okay? So because you're only having to wager, in this case, half the time, right? Half the time you bust out and you don't have to grind out the wagering, only the time that you hit that you have to grind out the wagering. That's how we were able to increase the expected value to 480. If we were doing this strategy, okay, so where you're going $1 spins from the very start, so then you get something like that, okay? So you're grinding this out at low variance, so every time you're getting hit with this full house edge of the $48,000 wagering requirement. And let's say that's around your $600 line there. So you're grinding this out, and every time you're finishing on below the $600 that you deposited, okay? So you started with $600 deposit, they bumped your balance up to $1,800 with this bonus, and you've ground out that wagering and you've actually come below your $600. The reason for this is that you were going low variance, okay? In order to maximize the value of these offers, you want to go high variance at the start to get that balance up, or else bust it, in order to reduce the average amount that you're having to wager here. Now, on BetVictor, we currently recommend that you go $100 on a single number until you either hit or bust. I think that's to do with them having a max bet rule, okay? So not all casinos are going to allow you to do like we did in the example where you're essentially putting your full $1,800 on red or black, doubling up and then grinding out the wagering, okay? This whole thing's called the two-tier strategy, where you're essentially looking to hit a big win as quickly as possible. And if you hit that target win, then reduce your stake, just because we don't want to keep our variance super high as we're grinding out that wagering, okay? We'd rather not kind of keep that high variance wagering up as we go through the wagering, because then you can get burnt. We want to kind of keep that reasonable as we go through the wagering requirement, okay? Something like that. So with that in mind, we go back to the simulator, and let's say now that we're not doing slots anymore, we're going roulette, and we're doing single numbers this time, and we're doing $100 spins, okay? So this is the whole idea with our high variance. We're trying to hit a big win nice and early in order to reduce. We want to reduce the amount that we're wagering on average, okay? Obviously, sometimes you're going to hit, sometimes you're going to lose, but we want to reduce the amount that we're wagering on average. You can kind of think of this wagering process as kind of like a tax. So as you grind through this wagering, you're paying a tax in the house edge, okay? So that is eroding your value as you wager through. So you want to reduce the amount that you're having to wager this on average. So let's then say we're doing roulette, $100 spins on a single number on the roulette table. And this is where this comes in. So if you're changing the gameplay after hitting a target balance, well, why would we change the gameplay after hitting a target balance? This is exactly what I was saying. You don't want to keep up this super high variance wagering, because then you're going to bust out quite a lot of the time. It's just going to be very reckless, okay? So you really want to go high variance at the start. Once you hit your target balance, for example, 3,600 here, then we reduce the stake, okay? So let's say that we're hitting a target balance this time of 3,600. That's the amount that you would win if you hit your stake on $100 on a single number, okay? So you're going to come away with 3,600 at a minimum. If you hit early on, so your first bet hits, then you'll be on a lot higher than 3,600. So let's see how this looks. Then if we win, then we're going to go on slots. We're going to go low variance, and we have a 97.5% slot, for example, on BetVictor, which is this Wild Orient one. With Wild Orient, it's very, very low variance. So the whole idea is we're reducing our variance massively here. And let's just run that simulation. So you can see here, this is how we arrive at roughly our $699 expected value. You can play about with different kind of parameters here. You could go $200 if you like, or $50. And you can see how that affects the expected value and the bust rate. The bust rate is, of course, the probability that you're going to lose your balance, okay? So that's the chance that your balance goes into the floor before you finish the wagering requirement. Okay, I think that's enough. So essentially this one is coming in at $700 expected value with a 61% bust rate. So this is definitely a high risk strategy. It's definitely not for beginners, but if you've been doing this for a while and you want to get $700 of expected value, then you can do that with this strategy. Just make sure that you read the terms of each of the casinos properly, okay? Some of them will have rules against two-tier betting, and if that's the case, then you kind of just need to keep your variance nice and high from the start. So you kind of just need to keep, you could go, for example, $20 stakes on this offer. It's going to be a high bust rate here, for example. So essentially what you're doing there is very high variance from the start, okay? So you're kind of doing something like that. Some people are going to hit a big win, some people are going to bust, but the average amount that you wager, because this guy, for example, did not have to wager the full 48,000. This guy might bust out super early, so he only had to wager, for example, 10,000. So the whole idea is that you're reducing this average wagering, okay? This is only if they have rules against two-tier betting. As long as you understand the fundamental principle that we're trying to reduce the average amount wagered by either busting out or hitting a big win as quickly as possible. Of course, once you hit the big win, there's not really much upside to keeping on the massive variance. You want to reduce the variance as much as you can to make that ride through the wagering as smooth as possible. Hey guys, I was just editing this video and I realized I didn't talk about the bankroll bust rate, which is actually very important. So let's say that we're doing this BetVictor offer. We get $600 deposit, $1,200 bonus. We have to wager this $48,000. And we were doing slots, I think it was. Medium variance slot is fine. $20 spins. The whole idea is to reduce that average amount wagered. And let's say that our bankroll is 10,000, okay? This is where we kind of recommend a bankroll in each of the guides, okay? So let's say we've got a 10K bankroll, and I'm going to just see what it says here and explain what it kind of means. So the bankroll bust rate is essentially asking the question, if I was to repeat this strategy over and over and over again, what's the chance that I would lose a bankroll of, in this case, $10,000, right? That is too high for my liking. You want to get that lower than 0.5%. So let's say we had $15,000 bankroll. How does that change things? It's still slightly high. So this is basically saying that you need, for this particular strategy, right, this is a kind of crazy strategy where you're going $20 spin, so it's extremely risky. No wonder it's kind of, yeah, this is what you want here, like less than 0.5%. But the strategy that we had on the guide was this here. You know, you've got 1 out of 37. If you had a target balance of 3,600, then you grind it out on slots at very low, you know, low variance. And I think you'll find that this is probably going to demand less of a bankroll. You kind of want a bankroll such that your bankroll bust rate is less than 0.5%. Yeah, this is a much more modest strategy. I think it can probably even take, like, let's even try a 10k bankroll there. Yep. So this is a lot more feasible because you're playing roulette. Whenever you play roulette instead of slots, it tends to be, yeah, there's just a few bankrolls creeping in the many simulations here. So just to go over that again, bankroll bust rate is essentially, if you were to do this offer over and over again, infinitely, you know, what proportion of those universes are you going to actually lose all of your money? So you want to keep that super small. So you can also use this for sports offers. So say, for example, we're doing the B-win offer. So let's say that we're doing this offer. We were depositing $200. We get a $200 bonus. And we have to grind through $2,400 in order to withdraw your balance as cash. Okay, so just like the casino bonuses, it's the same idea. Deposit $200, get a $200 bonus, wager $2,400 before you can withdraw. So now we're doing sports bets and we're going, let's say the average bet that we place is going to be odds of 2, but you can change that if you like. And on the Dutch matcher, we're getting average ratings of 97%. And let's say that we're doing the 2-tier strategy, so we're going $400 initially, okay, and just to remind you, let's set this up for B-win. So this is essentially the B-win offer, and by going $400 on a single bet at the start, we're either doubling or busting right off the bat. And if we bust out, then of course, you know, you've only lost 3% of that initial $400, right? So if you win, then you might have to keep on going, and these are going to be like $200 bets. So, you know, it might be something like this, and you could well bust out before you finish the wagering. Of course, you're always hedging these bets. You know, if it's a sports offer, you're always hedging these bets on the other side. So it's not like you've lost this money. It's going to be in your Pinnacle or whatever your hedge bet account is. But the whole idea with going $400 at the start is to get this big chance of busting out, right? And if you were to go odds of 3, for example, well, then you've got a kind of roughly a 67% chance of busting out and a kind of 33% chance of hitting, you know, around $1,200, right? Something up here. So the higher odds that you go with that initial bet, the bigger chance of busting out, the lower your average amount wagered. And this perfectly ties into the whole idea of why we actually need a simulator, because for us to work out the average amount wagered for a particular strategy, well, we need to simulate all of these spins, okay? So we need to do Monte Carlo simulation and find out, okay, what is the average person actually wagering here? What is the average profit at the end of all of these different Monte Carlo simulations, okay? So we just spit these out, you know, hundreds of thousands of times and take the average profit at the end, okay? Whether it's a casino bonus or a sports bonus, it's all the same thing. We're trying to work out the average value of this offer, and the only way to do that is with Monte Carlo simulation. You can't actually work out, you know, the average amount wagered from playing a particular strategy unless you use Monte Carlo simulation. So, you know, for the BetRivers offer, this is a very easy kind of thing because you've got roulette, which has got a very reasonable number of outcomes, and you can very easily do this very simple probability tree, but that's only essentially, you know, one spin. So basically things are very simple here because you've got, you know, a very simple probability tree where it's like you either win or lose. If you win, then you're up $1,000 in that example. If you lose, then you have to grind through the wagering requirement. Okay. However, if you're talking about many big spins, for example, in roulette or like a slot, this thing gets incredibly complicated. So, you know, even if you've got a very simple slot where you've only got kind of 3 outcomes, you might have something like this here. You know, on your first spin, you might win $3, you know, lose $1 or lose your entire $5 stake, for example. Okay. So, you know, something like that with various probabilities. And essentially what I'm saying is things get very messy. These trees get extremely messy, and you can't really calculate these expected values analytically, okay? This whole thing's called, you know, calculating this analytically. It gets very messy. That probability tree just gets insanely complicated very quickly. And that's why we need Monte Carlo simulation. So Monte Carlo simulation comes along and essentially says, let's just run one simulation through this probability tree and then see the outcome. Okay, so the outcome was plus $300, for example. Okay, let's send another one through. Okay, that guy lost $100. So that guy lost $100. And then we send hundreds of thousands of those simulations through, and we take an average of all of these profits, and that is called our expected value. Okay, and it takes an average of all those expected values. In that case, that would be the average of these two outcomes, and that would be $100. So that's the whole idea with this Monte Carlo simulator. It's essentially allowing you to see into the future. Okay, so you can essentially set up any strategy that you like. You know, we have these strategies in our guides, and you can play around with that. So there's B-Win, for example. We're playing through $400 spins flat. Let's say that we're changing that to, okay, we're looking for an $800 balance. And then if we hit the $800 balance, we're going to then reduce our stake to, you know, $100. We can simulate that and we get 160 there. So the worst case scenario is you have to wager everything, and that gives you $128 profit. Best case scenario, you lose your first bet and then you're finished the wagering straight away. Okay, so this thing gives you average profit. Also, interestingly, this thing gives you recommended bankrolls. So because we can simulate this over and over again, we can essentially simulate how much balance that you would need to hedge your bets in this case, right? So based on our simulations, this thing is saying that $1,369 will keep you safe, as in that'll be enough to hedge your bets 95% of the time. So that is the simulator, all right? The whole idea with this, as we say, is to try and reduce the amount that you're wagering on the casino. The more that you wager, the more you're going to lose on average, all right? So we're trying to reduce that as much as possible in order to increase our expected value, with the caveat that we don't want to increase that variance too much. We don't want to go too risky, right? Or else, you know, we'll be hitting a massive bust rate. Okay, so there's a kind of sweet spot there. So you can use the casino simulator to simulate any of these offers. Okay, every single one of these is possible to simulate in the simulator. These are all either cashable bonuses or refund bonuses. And you know, it's kind of worth mentioning that this one, for example, is 100% deposit match up to $1,000. But the wagering is actually so low, so you only have to wager 15 times the bonus in order to convert that to cash. So 15 times the bonus in this case is $15,000. And if you had to grind that out on a 3% house edge slot, okay, so obviously slots, you know, have this house edge built into them. They only pay out 97% roughly of what you pay into them. So if you have to wager $15,000, you're going to lose around $450, okay? But that's completely fine, because you're getting $1,000, you're losing $450, so your expected value is around $550, all right? So in this case, there isn't really any point in going massive variance at the start and then reducing your stake, because there's not much benefit to that. You're only losing $450 from the entire wagering. It's only 15 times your bonus that you have to wager. So that's why we don't recommend doing the two-tier strategy all the time. It's only a benefit if that wagering is so long that you are better off reducing your average wagering, okay? If you were to try and double your $2,000 balance here, that would obviously give you a much higher bust rate. So this strategy allows you to keep your bust rate super low and also give you a very high expected value, okay? So you only need to use the two-tier strategy or reduce your average wagering whenever the wagering requirement is large. Say a rule of thumb, over 25 times the bonus amount. If it's over 25 times the bonus amount, then it's worth it to take that risk to reduce your average wagering. Okay, so you're looking to double your balance, for example, and then grind out the wagering. And just like with the refund offers, I'm just going to show you an example of how if you go higher variance at the start, the higher variance that you go at the start, the higher your expected value. So let's just show you an example of very simple offer, $100 deposit, $100 bonus, and 35 times wagering, which is very kind of standard. And let's say that you go $1 spins on a slot, just to keep this simple, okay? So that's not going to give you kind of much value there. It's going to give you $28 on average. If we increase that, then of course we're going to be busting out earlier on average. We're reducing our average wagering, and so our expected value is going to be even higher. You get 53 there, for example. And if we go even higher, you can see this bust rate's already very high at 78%. It's going to be even higher now, 83% bust rate and 66% expected value. So you can see as we increase our variance, more and more of our simulations are busting out very early. Okay, so they're busting out very early like this, and that is reducing this whole average wagering. So that's the simulator, and that's why we need to use the simulator. Okay, we can't calculate this stuff analytically, but if anything doesn't make sense of that, as always, just contact us on the contact page and we'd be glad to help. Thanks, guys.